since the 80s, in a way, we on the left have said that because one of the horrendous social damage that was wrought by neoliberal policies, combined with the silliness of the economic theories that were underwriting these policies, a collapse of it or a rebellion against it, or if that didn't happen, a fascism 2.0 was around the corner. And we keep doing that, and we keep saying that, and it keeps making sense. But there is something remarkable in the way that short-termism, which seems to be the name of the game, can last for a long time. And I mean, for instance, in France, the way in which we try to energize and wake people up is by saying, you know, if you don't wake up, next year Marine Le Pen might be elected president. What the recent regional election in France seemed to have shown is that you don't need that. In fact, just the fear of Marine Le Pen being elected is enough to make sure that she's not elected, but it doesn't matter because people who seem much more reasonable and okay will little by little carry out her plan, which means also that it will not be felt. So the big problem maybe that we're facing is not only the possibility of a full-fledged fascism that would look like one, but one that will continue to look like, you know, our governments look like today.
Spectacularly apt point. Let me give you an example. In 2012, spring of 2012, when the Golden Dawn neo-Nazis were emerging out of the woodwork in Greece, soon to take their places in Greece's parliament, they stormed power without going anywhere near government. In April, I believe, of 2012, a Socialist Party Minister of Health, in association with another Socialist Party Minister for Public Order, for the police, went into cahoots to have women arrested from the streets of Athens on the basis that they were posing risks for public health because they were operating as prostitutes infected by the HIV virus. They were picked up randomly from streets. They were placed in police cells, forcefully tested for HIV, and those who were HIV positive had their photographs posted on the internet. Now, I can't imagine what worse things the Golden Dawn thugs would have done if they were in power, especially given that all this was also portrayed in a fully fledged racist manner. The women that were being arrested were presented in the press as being black, as being Russian, as being Ukrainian. In the end, of course, most of them were Greek citizens. And at that time, some of us rose up and wrote fiery articles, and there was a beautiful documentary made on the subject. And the point was exactly the one you made. The fascists, the Nazis, don't need to enter the buildings of the ministries. They are in power without being in government, whereas those who are in government are not in power. So this is the greatest fear, the greatest danger, the greatest peril that we are facing. And I believe that this is an intermediate step. We are being in a sense, surreptitiously, and without any central design or plan or conspiracy or anything like that, it is as if we're being prepared for the moment when we say, well, we have the Nazi policies, well, let's have the Nazis as well. Or it doesn't really matter if Marine Le Pen is president, if her policies are already being implemented by the Socialist Party. So, my greatest fear is that Marine Le Pen will seem like a decent development as president, because at least she will have something to say about the incongruities and the irrationality of the euro, whereas President Hollande doesn't. He allows, in a sense, for an ultra-right-wing social agenda to be introduced in order not to lose more votes to Le Pen, without having the strength of argument that Le Pen has regarding the flimsiness of the monetary situation that the French social economy has to suffer under.
Since you resigned from Syriza-1 government, at the end of Syriza-1 government, you've been traveling quite a bit and talking quite a bit all over Europe. I will try to use all your travel and experience and encounters in the different countries to assess how an alternative, a possible alternative to what you just described until now could be possible. Because, I mean, in the wake of the end of the government that you were part of in Greece, there was a big fear that the failure of the first Tsipras government to change things would have a shockingly depressing effect on movements and people that were sympathetic to Syriza all over Europe. And indeed, at first, it seemed like the star of Podemos in Spain was falling a little bit, but it picked up somewhat. Contrary to that, in Britain, of course, Britain is not part of the Eurozone, but still, in Britain, a couple of months after the Syriza surrender, to call it that, there was the emergence of Jeremy Corbyn, and something that was totally unexpected. Now there is the possibility of a new government, socialist government, but supported by the more radical left in Portugal. So if we could have, like, you know, a panorama of what have been your experience in the various countries that you've visited, maybe taking them one by one, and maybe starting with Britain, since that's one country where you've spent a lot of time.
Well, let me begin by saying that when we were running for government about a year ago, just before the election on the 25th of January, our slogan was, we are challenging austerity in Greece to change Europe. We challenged austerity unsuccessfully. We were defeated and surrendered in July. And that cast a dark cloud, dark shadow over many people around Europe, even center-right people who were hoping that what we were doing in Greece was going to create a new agenda, a new dialogue, new possibilities for the whole of the European Union. And our defeat had this depressing effect on many people. So the first thing I tried to do was to connect with as many Europeans as I could in order to ensure that that doesn't happen. The pessimism does not prevail. Okay, we acknowledge we lost the battle, but it was important that we gave that battle, and that now the surrender of the Greek government is set aside, and we move on to taking the battle to many different other front lines. The main front line being the whole of the European continent, and not just the Eurozone. This is where Britain comes in. I started my travels in France, I went to Germany, Britain, various other places, where I addressed a multiplicity of audiences, not all from the left, some from the right, including, even recently, a few days ago, bunches of bankers and financiers. The good news, since this is the segment of our interview which is more evangelical in a sense, the good news is that the vast majority of those who came to talk to me, with me, or to listen to me, did not do so out of an urge to show solidarity with the Greeks. They arrived with a sense of foreboding and sense of concern about what effect the crashing of the Greek government would have on them, on their societies, on their welfare state, on their pension, on their local hospital, on their local school, on the capacity of their communities to make decisions pertinent to their own lives. And that was a great source of satisfaction and joy for me, and hope. And very soon I got this idea that either as Europeans we harness that sensation, that feeling, which truly binds us together and allows us to redefine the European identity on the basis of resistance of the terrible false dilemma between, on the one hand, accepting the powers that be in Brussels and their catastrophic policies, or the narrative of Brexit or Grexit or fragmentation or moving back into the cocoon of the nation state. If we can harness that spirit of concern for locality with concern for the globality of Europe, in order to create a third alternative. We stay in Europe in order to challenge head-on the heavily anti-democratic processes and institutions of the European Union, to salvage Europe and the European Union from them. And I get this sensation whenever I go in Europe that there is a possibility for this. There are no guarantees, there is no certainty, but there is enough hope to keep me excited and make me wake up in the morning and throw all my energies into this lot. The referendum which the Tory government has called Britain, I think is a splendid opportunity for the whole of Europe to redefine its identity. Most Brits are opposed to Brussels. They don't like being bossed around by an unaccountable bureaucracy in the European Union, but at the same time they are very coy about leaving the devil they know for the unknown and for effectively sailing off into the Atlantic without a clear destination, distancing themselves from the continent. So it is important for those of us who believe in breaking down and opposing this false polarization between Euro-loyalism, being loyal to Brussels as it is and to Frankfurt, and the process of fragmentation of the European Union, to side with the forces of progress in Britain and effectively to forge a common alliance, a common mandate for contesting the European Union, wresting it away from the forces that loathe democracy, that are so contemptuous of democracy, the result being an economic crisis which strengthens authoritarianism, which strengthens the anti-democratic tendencies of Brussels. So I think that Britain and the referendum that will be taking place, we don't know exactly when, is a wonderful opportunity for a new movement that sees the democratization of Europe as its number one priority, to reunite the parts of the Eurozone and the parts of the European Union which are not in the Eurozone that want to see Europe getting stronger and doing so through democratization and confrontation with the current powers that be.
Is that a thrust that you feel in your contact with the people in the Labour Party or the current direction of the Labour Party?
Absolutely. I think that they understand very well that it is essential for the Labour Party to map out a third path. Neither the blind acceptance of what Brussels is and how it operates, that some Blairites are happy to condone, or some very few Tories like Ken Clarke have a tendency to adopt, nor to accept the Euroscepticism of many of the Tories and some of the Labour sections of the Labour Party, which seem to believe that Britain does not need the European Union, to create a radical third alternative, which says something very simple. We want to be part of the European Union in order to fight against Brussels and to fight against the deep contempt that Brussels has for democratic processes, while knowing that exit from the European Union is not going to take Britain towards the road that leads to socialism, but it will much rather take it towards a kind of isolationism, a little Englandism that will make it more vulnerable to awful trade agreements like TTIP and the loss of sovereignty through free trade agreements.
That's for England. Now let's move to Spain. You've been in Spain quite a bit, and well, there are two parts. On the one hand, there is Podemos, or the central committee of Podemos, you could say. And in the very beginning, as you said many times, I mean, there was, at the time when Syriza was elected first last January, there was this notion that the two beacons of hope for those who didn't like the European policies were Syriza in Greece and Podemos in Spain. And in fact, there was a very tight alliance between Pablo Iglesias and Alexis Tsipras in particular. And that alliance, in fact, seems to have continued under Syriza too, even though it's not very, I mean, the solidarity is expressed by Iglesias with much less enthusiasm than it was under Syriza 1, but nonetheless, he has made a point to remain loyal there. Which could be a problem for Podemos, because if what they have to offer to the Spanish people is Syriza 2, they become a little bit less of a beacon of hope. At the same time, it hasn't affected it as badly as one could have feared. However, it could be said that the reason why it hasn't affected them as badly is because they've had the impulse from a germane movement, but which is not Podemos, which is the movement of the confluencias. And mostly the one in Barcelona, but also in Valencia, but also in Galicia and in other places. And there are two aspects which are interesting, and I want to have your views on that, is that on the one hand, they insist very much on the importance of the municipal level as a way of constructing resistance, and seem therefore very close to your position, which is a position that on the one hand we won't accept Europe as it is, but this is not a reason to concentrate on the nation state.
The recent Spanish election was a magnificent result, primarily because it put paid to the toxic narrative of a success story of austerity. It's clear that the Spanish people rejected the view that austerity worked and that Spain was a glowing example of how the policies of the Troika, if adopted vigorously and enthusiastically by the local elites, are going to work. They didn't work, and the Spanish people said so. The second reason why it was a remarkable experience for me was because of the confluencia, as we put it, the way in which a variety of social movements, I think of Ada Colau in Barcelona, we mentioned, Hadici and her colleagues and comrades rise up by targeting predatory tourism, and in particular home foreclosures from the banking sector that was being salvaged by the weakest of taxpayers. On the basis of that, they went from 0
to effectively wresting power and control in the great city of Barcelona. This is a great beacon of hope for all of us. The capacity of cities to produce progressive politics flies in the face of the failures of the left over the last 100 years. And our pan-European movement, whichever it is that in the end energizes Europeans and brings them together in order to create a potential for reconstituting the dynamics of European progressive politics. This has to be energized from the cities and to adopt the methods, the narrative, the esprit, the élan of these movements. And I'm very pleased that Podemos has adopted this line and have embraced those movements. Having said that, I'm convinced that despite all the right incentives and motives of any progressive party like Podemos, to think that through this electoral process at the level of the nation state, we can arrest the degeneration process of the European Union, that is a mistake. The best that a party like Podemos can hope for is participation in some kind of coalition government, just like in Portugal. If we, opponents of the third Memorandum of Agreement, were to set up a new party, the best thing we could imagine would happen is some kind of coalition with Syriza too, as you put it. But all these coalitions would only be formed under condition of accepting the rules of the Eurogroup, the rules of the Troika, the rules of the game, which has been rigged to ensure that all these mandates of progressive movements are crushed before they even get a chance to find expression at the level of national politics. This is why I believe that what happened in Barcelona, in Valencia, what's happening in the streets of many villages and cities and towns in Greece, in Denmark, in Britain, and so on and so forth, will only find expression that does not betray the initial ideology, the initial impetus, if we manage to bind together at the level of Europe and exert pressure everywhere simultaneously.
Okay, so that would mean there is a municipal level that exists, but okay, but well, the national level seemed to be slightly bracketed in what you say, when you say that Podemos, the best it could hope, would be a coalition of the kind that one has in Portugal, and you seem to imply, correct me if I'm wrong, you seem to imply that with their best intentions, they will have no other choice, being a coalition, than to be something closer to Syriza.
Look at Portugal. In Portugal, the President of the Republic made it an explicit condition for the formation of the left-wing government that they would accept the commitments to the Eurogroup.
That's right.
The rules of the Eurogroup.
That's right.
Now that is astonishing, because it might be that you accept the rules, but at the same time you have a policy of going to the Eurogroup demanding that the rules be changed. It's like, for instance, imagine if a national parliament were to commit never to change the constitution, or never to legislate new pieces of legislation that contradict the older ones. What's the point?
Yeah,
we might as well not have a parliament.
That's right.
Yeah? So any party of the left that accepts the rules and commits not to challenge them legally effectively has no reason to exist and cannot affect change through national politics. To get the, if you want, the audacity, the strength, the courage to go against this prescription by the President of the Portuguese Republic, the Socialist Party of Portugal, the left parties all over the periphery would have to have the support of like-minded Europeans throughout the Eurozone, throughout the European Union. If we had such a movement, which was effectively pressurizing the government of Austria, through the National Parliament of Austria, of Slovakia, of France, of Germany to end the pressure on a new government in Portugal to commit never to challenge the rules, then there is a possibility that even the Socialist Party of Portugal would find the courage necessary not to commit to effective political oblivion.
Okay, this raises, it seems to me, two questions. First of all second of all, we'll get to that later. Second of all will be how is that trans-European movement to be created to operate in order to exercise a pressure that would be strong enough to give courage to a national government. But to the extent that this movement, though we'll come to it in a minute, is still budding, what does it mean for parties that are competing for national elections now, like the Portuguese that just have been elected, like the Irish that are going to be going to elections in the next few months? In other words, what could be, if there is one, the survival kit, to call it that, of a government that would be, or a coalition government, or majority or a strong minority that would form a government, that what would be their survival kit in order to be able to do better, to put it simply, than what finally the Tsipras government did in Greece? And what would be basically the kits, the methods?
The weaker the banking system and the state's finances, the easier it will be for Brussels and Frankfurt and Berlin to snuff out any kind of resistance from a newly elected progressive government in Dublin, wherever, in Spain and so on and so forth. So the answer will have to be tailor-made per member state. The most important aspect of this must be what I was saying before, to help to create a sense of solidarity amongst progressives throughout the European Union that allows progressive parties in member states to find the courage to even think of the question that you posed. That's the first point, to help them stiffen their lip, in a sense. Secondly, once that has been achieved, you need to maximize your capacity as a government to fend off threats, and in particular the threat of bank closures. Mm-hmm. This is how they pushed us into a hole, by beginning a bank run and a run on the Greek banks before we were elected, which then they accelerated through the rumor that the central bank would not be supporting the Greek banks. And then at some point, when this self-fulfilling prophecy was creating a bleeding of deposits, to say, this is what you've done by not negotiating properly, and then to close their banks down, and then effectively put the Prime Minister in a position of choosing between surrender or a complete cessation of the banking payments system. Let me give you one brief practical answer to your question. What is your survival kit? In other words, how do you bolster your bargaining power? It would help to digitize payments. When the banks closed in Greece on the 30th of June, this is the practical example I'm giving you, 85% of pensioners didn't even have debit cards by which to go to shops to buy things, or to take out of ATMs the paltry 60 euros a day that we allow them to have. This, of course, you realize is tantamount to a humanitarian catastrophe, when 85% of all people, of pensioners, have no access to any payment mechanism. If every transaction was digitized, the threat of bank closures would be far lesser, and therefore the degrees of freedom of the government would be much greater. These are technical issues, but it is important to keep them in mind, because the central bank and the powers that be do keep them in mind. It's important that we have defenses based on the same kind of logic, I'm afraid.
So these defenses would be emergency defenses. How long can they...
I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong. I mean, actually, Estonia is the only country I know which has fully digitized transactions. It's actually a great thing. Andy Haldane, the chief economist of the Bank of England, suggested it for Britain. In a sense, it's the way things are going. So I might as well get there very quickly. It helps defeat tax evasion. It even allows us not to use quantitative easing, but to impose negative interest rates to stimulate the economy. There are many benefits from it, one of which is to reduce the power of the central bank to blackmail a recalcitrant member state government.
So, for instance, a measure like that would help bolster the bargaining position of a government of even a small country as Portugal?
Of course.
Yes.
Of course. Because if bank closures mean a humanitarian crisis, and Frankfurt has the capacity to close down your banks, then your bargaining power is much lesser.
Right.